Right.
It's made it a little more difficult.
Yeah. Well, I've told friends that they need to sign up even if they want to just get the recording, because then they'll get the email.
Yeah, because I send that follow-up email.
Yeah.
So everybody who's in the room now, if you have to jump off or you lose your connection, we are recording today's event. So we'll send out a follow-up email with the link to the recording. Also today, we'll be taking questions and answers. So use the Q&A box if you can, or the chat box, and I'll relay the questions to Marinda. But thank you for joining us. And then we are open Tuesdays through Saturday here in Larkspur from 12 to 4 for curbside service. So you can put books on hold, movies on hold. We've just started ordering books again, which we're really thrilled about. So new books and new films should start coming in pretty soon. We've been a little behind. There's just 2 librarians here, me and my coworker who's on vacation, trying to, place all the orders and get them all processed and put up on the shelf. So thank you all for your patience. Oh, I realize if I wiggle my mouse, the screen starts to go through the. So, and I think it looks a little different. You might not have a raise a hand element on your side, but the Q&A box and the chat box little symbols are down on the bottom of your screen. And the next month, we have Jessica O'Dwyer, who will be joining us to talk about her new book, Mother, Mother, a novel, which is actually coming out, I think, next Friday. It's being released. So.
Right.
Okay, it's a little after 2, so let me put this in the gallery. So thank you everybody for joining us. I'm Franklin Escobedo. I'm the Community Services Director here at the Larkspur Library, and I'm also in charge of recreation here in Larkspur. But thank you for joining us for our, I think our 3rd author talk. And today I'm happy to have a local author, Marinda Freeman, who will be talking about her book, The Grief Train. So, so I guess we'll hand it over to you to introduce yourself, Marinda. Thanks for joining us.
Oh, thank you, Franklin. I want to acknowledge and thank you and the Larkspur Library for this wonderful event, for being creative and finding a way to make this work for all of us in these unusual circumstances. So I really appreciate it. I wanted to say my book is a very timely, more than I realized when it got published in June, because we're all dealing with a lot of grief. I started by writing a blog, and then it got shared with others that had experienced loss that I knew, and they inspired me to write the book, and I wrote it to help others. So I'm really honored to share with you today. And I also just want to acknowledge every one of you that is here today. Thank you for coming and joining the Larkspur Library Author Talk. It's a challenging time for authors to promote themselves, and I really appreciate what Franklin and the Larkspur Library are doing. And to acknowledge that there's been a hard time for all of us with loss, not only just the death of loved ones, but just the complete stop of being able to connect with other people, to love and hug and be with our friends and loved ones, that we don't have the ability to move around freely as we usually are. And so there's loss, whether it's in the past or in the present, and I'm happy to share with you today. Thank you.
So you really started this process by initially starting a blog. So why did you want to start a blog?
Well, actually, if you read my book, it was my husband's assignment, because I checked in with him with a medium after he died, and he was very specific that I needed to do like all these things after he was gone. I'm like, what is this? So I started a blog, and really it was a practice for myself to honor my own personal feelings and processes. I had no intention of anything, just writing what my thoughts and feelings were as I went through the process. And for about 1.5 years, I just wrote the blog, and then there were friends that had a loss, and I shared the blog. I didn't promote it in any way. I shared it with them, and they found it so helpful And then my writing group that I started writing classes at Book Passage with Leslie Keenan, and I've been in a writing group ever since. We meet once a week. And when I was too busy to write on my event book, which was really the book that I was writing with them, and I started reading my blog post, and they said you had to turn it into a book. So here I am, all these years later. I got sidetracked and wrote this book, and hopefully next year I'll have this other book out. But I'm grateful to have been inspired to do this, because I think we need this information more now than I could have ever imagined.
Well, I know your husband's, but you also talk about your sister in the book as well. I mean, this is, I think it's different stops on the grief train, but it's for you, the writing experience was a way for you to express your grief correctly, right?
Yes, to really process it, to examine it. Here I thought that after 3 years after my husband's death, I was ready to move on. And then my sister ends up in the hospital, and 3 weeks later she dies. And so there I am, being washed over with grief again, because I was really more her mom than her sister, because she was developmentally disabled. And so her death was really then the impetus for me to start writing. And I kept saying I was going to write my event book. I no longer had the care for her or concern in any way, and that's what got me started on this process of writing. So.
Okay. So what do you suggest we say to someone that has experienced the loss of a loved one? That's one of the hardest things to do. So
it is, and I bring it up several times in my book. Here's my book. I keep forgetting to do that. I think the hardest thing is that we avoid talking to someone because we don't know what to say. And the most important thing is just to be present with them, not to try and steer them one way or another. If you're going to ask them something, say, how are you feeling today? Don't ask them, how are you feeling? Because, how can you answer that? That's like the $64,000 question. So how are you feeling today? Gives them a focus, a short focus, to be able to answer that. And I had a friend tell me, don't just tell them, oh, if you need anything, let me know. Because it's like, how are you doing? That's one of those, I have no idea what I need. But you can offer, how about if I bring you dinner tomorrow night? Or how about if I come and just hang out with you? And just sit with them, be with them, let them talk. And I know in today we can't just sit with them so much, because here we are having to distance ourselves, but phone call or do a personal Zoom call so that we can just hang out with them a bit. And even a phone call just to check in and just to be with them rather than trying to push it. I think the thing we have to remember is that this takes a long time. It takes years. This is not something of 3 months. It's like, aren't you done with that already? No, it's an ongoing thing. And one death, it's like when my sister died, all the grief came back up again. So one situation will trigger another and come back around. So there is no order to the process of grief. There are all these stages of grief. Elizabeth Kubler-Ross writes about the 5 stages of grief, but there's a most recent book by David Kessler that talks about the 6th stage of grief, which is meaning, which I think my book addresses. It's really, what does this mean, and how do I look at what this has occurred? When my husband died, it was like, oh, now I'm a widow. What's that mean? I've never done that before. So it's looking at meaning and where we are in our experience as we go through it.
I know part of writing the book, but when you became a widow, did that start to instill you to go and look at the process? Because I know you talk a lot about the history of a widow, how it used to be different, how we used to have these different rituals.
Right. Well, that was sort of down the road, actually. In my process, I did a lot of reading about what grief is, and actually, maybe I'll take a moment here to talk about the distinction between grief and mourning, because grief is the emotion. Grief is the emotion that's just going to show up. Emotion is energy in motion, and we can't control it. But for doing the work of grief, we need to dive into that grief. We need to experience it, feel it, hold it, allow it. Allow those feelings and be with them. That's the work of grief, to dive deep down into the waters of grief so that we can come back up refreshed in life. If we push it away, it's going to keep coming back. We have to do that work. Where mourning is the action. So the action of creating an altar for ourselves to focus our mourning, our grief. A friend wore black every day for 2 years after her husband died. So that's another action. You know, we've had all these ceremonies of rituals of funerals and memorials that even now are even more difficult because we have to do that in this circumstance of a Zoom rather than being together. But again, I've heard that even in a Zoom memorial, there is a lot of emotion. So because people are coming together and honoring that person and remembering them, that is that process of mourning in action. And so that's the distinction between the two. And then what happened in my process of all the studying, then it was all of a sudden like I heard in meditation, discarding widow's weeds. It's like time for me to do that. And I'm like, what is that? So I started doing research, and then a month later, the New York Metropolitan Museum created an exhibit called Death Becomes Her: A Century of Mourning Attire, 1815 to 1915. And I found a book about all the protocol that we no longer have. You know, woman was responsible for representing the family's grief, and she wore black for 2 to 4 years. So there was that action of mourning every day. There were foods that were served for the funeral. There was protocol. They would drape black crepe over their front door when someone died. Someone died at home, not in a hospital. So it was much more present. And I think the flip side of this COVID is we're having to really address death. And this culture that we live in has not wanted to address death. And it's something we all take a trip. We're all going to go there. And how do we prepare for it? And how do we have our loved ones prepared for it so we know what they want? You know, that's important too.
There's all sorts of little tidbits in here. I still love the recipes that you've sprinkled throughout the book. Why did you, I mean, I know they're important. Eating sometimes is a coping mechanism, but I love, what was one of the reasons for leaving all that?
Well, I'm a chef. I've cooked from, basically I started baking at age 5 and cooking dinners at age 9. So I've been cooking my whole life. I've taught cooking classes. And then my husband was a chef, so he went to the California Culinary Academy just because he loved to cook and got a degree as a cordon bleu chef. So, I mean, how could I not marry him as this cordon bleu chef? So we loved cooking together and entertaining and figuring out what we were going to make. And so it was really in remembrance of him. And actually, one of the first reviews I got was someone saying they never thought about cooking and serving the food that a loved one liked in a way to remember them. So I guess you could call that action another way of mourning, of bringing that present and remembering the joy, because part of it is also remembering the joy of that they had in your life when they were around.
Did you have a favorite recipe out of all these in here?
Oh, gosh, no, I'm such a seasonal chef that I love whatever is in season. I do have to say that his lobster bisque, which I can't find the recipe, is the one that made me want to marry him. The first bite I took, it was incredible. And my friends would agree that also had his lobster bisque, but his baked halibut and parchment, I love that recipe because it's super easy. I'm into super easy recipes, things that are simple, and anybody could make that. So I highly recommend everyone try that.
So, and then you broke the book up into the different chapters, like, you know, the train, the station.
Yeah.
How did you, could you explain why, well, I know that it's called the grief train, but was it just something that came to you? How did you come to this way of breaking the book apart that way?
Well, thank you for asking that. I ended up calling it the grief train because it ended up for me that, you know, you never know when the grief train is going to show up in your station. You're just hanging out and all of a sudden something sparks and this wave of grief comes over you. So it's like you're just hanging out in the station and all of a sudden the grief train shows up. And again, our job is to sit there and allow it and honor it and go, oh, here it is, you know, and feel it. And so it's also a journey because my feelings of grief changed over time. They weren't as raw. The first year I kept comparing, well, last year we were doing this and last year we were doing that. And after his first anniversary of his death, I could no longer do that comparison. He was completely gone. And then the second, and I was doing a little ceremony for each anniversary. And the second anniversary of his death, I did a altar and a ceremony with my friend Catherine, who's also a minister. And I created this altar and we served his wine and some cheese and crackers that he liked and spoke about him. So it became a ceremony of remembrance and also honoring and noting the time, because the time goes by fast. And at the same time, it feels like it was yesterday that they were here. So it's a journey. We're going down that track, but we're also just sitting at the station, not knowing when that train's gonna come zooming into our lives. So.
Well, no, and I think we talked a little bit about this when we first spoke, that I'm that kind of person who likes to deny it, but I'm still sitting in the train and I'm not paying attention. I'm trying to you know, suspend disbelief and that it's not happened, but it's happened.
Yeah.
And it's the but you spoke about the altar. So did you want to talk more about the altars and how people?
I would love to, because I think I've gotten some feedback from several friends that had not thought about using an altar as a help for their mourning. And I've always created altars, but I didn't even know that that's what they called them for a long time, because beauty has a very high vibration. So creating beautiful spaces and beautiful little areas with fresh flowers or whatever, to me, bring a remembrance of life and the beauty that we have around us. And I have some slides I can share. Some are in the book, but I'd love to share them with you, and I'll talk about altars and showing the pictures. So here we go. And some of these are in the book. So this is my altar in my bedroom, and the window's open, and that's Mount Tamalpais in the background. This altar is not a memorial other than this framed art here is a collage that my friends made when we were together, and I broke my wrist. So they all made this, and there's a doll's arm hand there. So I put that on my altar as a remembrance of my friends' love and caring as I was healing from breaking my wrist. Then altars change. You can continue to evolve. I always create something that's beautiful that I can focus my attention on spirit, on the essence of life that is all there is. I have American Indian medicine pouches hanging on the wall on the left, and on the right are little pouches from Tibet. And this is just the beauty of simplicity. And at the same time, I have put mala beads around the Buddha, which are the beads you use when you're meditating or chanting, to count the chanting. And then because I've been in New York, staying at this rooming house that was run by the nuns, when we left, my girlfriend and I were each given a rosary. So that's hanging on the Buddha's neck. So, you know, it's all love. So then this altar, again, another transformation, and again, just for love. My daughter doesn't live with me anymore, so there's our picture, so I can see her pretty face on my altar. I love crystal balls because, you know, I can say I have crystal balls. Doesn't tell me anything about the future. I just say I have them. This is the altar I made when our cat Claire died, and I found this little sculpture of a cat with wings. And you know, animals are our loved ones too, whether it's a cat or a dog. They've been with us. They express so much love that it's right to honor them. Also, by creating an altar that is a remembrance and a place to focus our grief. And by creating that, our mourning. I created a little altar in my office recently, just as I was getting my office together because I moved. I have a photo of my husband. I have beautiful flowers and some crystals, a candle. These are all good components to have. I mean, you don't have to have crystals, but you know, other lovely nature objects. And then I have 3 heart rocks that I had found over time. So I put feathers on the altar. It can continue to evolve and change. If you have children, then you can have them add something. If they're really little, maybe you want the altar higher, then little fingers can help themselves. But you know, Day of the Dead is another altar that is a wonderful ceremony once a year, that honoring those that have passed on. And this is a feast for those that have died. I think this is beautiful with all the food, so colorful. I used to go to a party years ago that my friend had every year for the Day of the Dead, and we would bring our photos and add it to her big altar. Here is another one that has a lot of photographs. Again, it's an honoring, a remembering, a place to bring our hearts and thoughts to them in a very specific and focused way. And then here we are today, or just a few days ago, the Supreme Court with Ruth Bader Ginsburg's passing and the draping of her chair at the Supreme Court, which is really hearkening back. This started in the 1870s with 1873 with the passing of a Supreme Court judge. And so this is what they did in the 1800s. They draped, well, this is black crepe, draped her chair and the front of her place that she sat as a, I look at this as an altar and a way to honor and remember her, and a place to bring our mourning by seeing. I think it's a very stark reminder of seeing that, of remembering that we have just lost her. So those are just some examples. There's so many things you can do, but you know, I have one friend who had never done it and she lost her husband. She just sent me a picture recently of her latest altar, and she says she lights her candle every night. And I know that is a solace to her. It helps her with her mourning, and she has a ritual by doing that with her altar. So. Well,
too, it's a way for you were talking about, it's a way to focus too.
Yes, yes, it is a way to focus. I think an altar, any place that you create some beauty and focus, it's bringing your attention to why you have these feelings. And it's honoring those feelings, it's honoring that grief, and it's honoring that person that you're remembering. And even for just focus, I have a Buddha that's just by himself because he's so beautiful as a sculpture. And that reminds me of the beauty of life, so that it can be any kind of remembrance to remind us of what is true for us, and then we can create that. And I think that's important today because we can't gather so much. So what is it we can do personally, individually, that will help us with the process that we're going through? And I think with all the COVID deaths, so many, I wish we could have a week of mourning. You know, we're all experienced this morning with Ruth Bader Ginsburg. I wish we could do the same for all of us across the country with everyone that has died from COVID. It's such a sad circumstance, and we want to honor all of them and join in the mourning that everyone that is affected has. So I just bring that up as a way for us to remember that as well.
Well, and I think too, one thing that, I mean, the book too it's not so much focused on one religion. It's written in a way that it's open to everybody. It's more about the process and not the grief, and not an ideology per se to one faith or another, right?
Right. Absolutely. You know, this is not about a religion. This is about, I think so many people are not attracted to a formalized religion, and at the same time are wondering, how do I address this grief? How do I address this? What do I do? And so my book is really to help one address that in a way that they can solve that for themselves and see examples to be able to do that in a very gentle, healing way, non-denominational. It's spiritual, but totally non-denominational.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, spirit is what we all are. So that's
well, and there's a part in here at the very beginning where you went to meet with Sarah. And could you tell us some more about Sarah?
Sarah, well, after we read my book.
I mean, it was a way of, you know, I mean, this, I think, wasn't.
Oh, with the medium.
Yeah.
Yes.
Wasn't that Sarah?
Okay.
Isn't that Sarah?
Yes. Sorry. I had known her for a long time, and so I actually called her after I learned that Mike died, because I know there's the thinning of the veils. There's so much that I've read. If you've read any of the Celestine Prophecies books, the last one really talks about the thinning of the veils, and actually the Day of the Dead is at the time when the thinning of the veils is the greatest of our connection to those that have passed on. And so I called her and I said, well, when do you think I could, connect with Mike? Because, how long does it take for him to land? He said, oh, about a month. So I waited a month, and then I had a session with her. And that's when he gave me my assignments. I have lost the whole list. There were like 10 things. I know I did the blog, but I don't remember the other things. And then I did check in with her on the first anniversary and the second anniversary. And I can tell you that just the thing that was most prevalent was the love. Mm-hmm. More than anything else, there was the love. And so that was the purpose really for me to check in with him.
Okay, I don't want you to start crying, Marinda.
It's okay. I have Kleenex ready.
My thing too, I was really afraid. It's a great book. It's not a vast amount of reading. I think you hit all the points that, you go through the process. And I love the examples, and I love the food in here. There's even a part about flowers, about sending flowers. And let me look at these other questions.
I'd love to answer that, because I actually like to read a couple things about flowers, because I started my blog with that. Somebody asked, how long ago did my husband die and my sister die? So, the process of writing a book takes more time than you can ever imagine. And then trying to get it published takes even longer than you could imagine. So my husband died in 2010, and my sister died in 2013. And here we are in 2020. Mm-hmm. So I finished the book several years ago, and then there was the process of finding a publisher and getting it published. So all of it is a process. But, when you bring up flowers, for me, that was something I started with, because here we are with something that is alive and beautiful. And I really appreciated bringing home the flowers from my husband's memorial and having them around. And near the end of the book, I address this again in a chapter called Why Do We Send Flowers? It says, in a recent Sunday New York Times Modern Love column, this paragraph jumped out at me. Why do we send flowers? To make up for what is intangible? Those feelings we can't hold in our hands and present as a gift to our loved ones? And why is it that placeholders we choose, the dozen red roses, the fragrant white lilies, the long stem French tulips are so fleeting? Hold on to them for too long and you end up with a mess of petals, pollen, and foul-smelling water. The article was about working in a flower shop, the stories people share when they buy flowers, and the variety of messages in the accompanying cards. This note was unusually honest. Cards and flowers seem so lame when someone dies, but we are thinking of you and want you to know. This definitely says what is true. We want to send our love and heartfelt caring to friends and family when they experience the loss of a loved one. And it is hard to know what to say. Flowers say it for us, though not usually with such a direct message included. For me, the beauty of flowers also represents the beauty of life. They are alive, beautiful, and ephemeral, a reminder to honor the preciousness of life in each and every moment. So I want to read just another little quote in the next chapter, because it's really, we're talking about grief, and this says, the crux of grief is a process that takes time, and we get signs to help us along, from life as well as sometimes from the deceased. The change from having that person we love at hand and then gone is the hardest part to adjust to. As the author Julie Meyerson quotes in her article, Loss, isn't that the hardest lesson of human existence? The finality of losing someone you love, of having them fall right out of your life forever, the cold and terrible permanence of it. And yet, I discovered love never dies or is lost. We hold it in our heart always. When we experience a loss, our heart is cracked open. And just like Leonard Cohen, in closing, I wanted to just, if there's any other questions, I want to ask them before I read this last part.
So
we do
have a couple questions. I know Barbara would like to ask the questions, so I don't know if you're okay with me unmuting some people. So I'm unmuting Barbara to ask your question. Now if I can get it to work right. There you go, Barbara. You should be able to unmute yourself.
Thank you, Franklin. I just say hello to Marinda. Oh gosh, congratulations on your fabulous book. And I don't know if you remember, but our connection is through Esther and Jocelyn. I was Esther's Brownie and Girl Scout leader for so long, so I've known Marinda for, to see you. And I also, Esther's picture of a woman, and she looks, and you're absolutely right, she's very, very pretty, and she looks happy, and the two of you look very happy together. So happy to see that. But Marinda, I had this marvelous, wonderful experience of finding a husband and, welcoming him into your life. So you both had that welcoming and then losing him, in a must have been a rough time, making it all the more intense, I would have to think.
Yeah.
Yeah, but, clearly you've done a wonderful job, taking that energy into your life and allowing it to transform you and those around you. And the love is very evident. I'm so, we're so sorry for your loss, but at the same time, happy that you're able to smile and celebrate and continue with a very good life. So I just wanted to say it was wonderful to see you and to thank you for doing this author talk, but talk a little bit more about the medium, because there's many of us here who have lost loved ones and would love an opportunity to, close a loop. Is there can we get in touch with this lady, and can we also, is there a time limit on it? Does the spirit, move on to other things, do you think, after they leave us? And I get that, I get the sense that as time goes by, the connections between the living and the spirit become a little more, elastic or broad or something. They go on to their next life experience. What are your thoughts there?
Well, I would say, thank you, first of all, for checking in. It's so wonderful to have you join us, and appreciate everything you've said. There's no time. Past the veil, there is no time. It's our own little physical construct we've had here. If you want to email me at marinda@thegrieftrain.com, I'm happy to recommend a medium. My friend Sarah isn't doing that anymore, but I do know others, and there is no time. I had a session with Sarah years ago, way before my husband and my grandmother came in, and that was, back a long time ago. So there's no time, so there's no concern there. And I would say the reason I could write this book and have my perspective is the spiritual work I've done all my life, and being a licensed spiritual counselor and teacher for over 20 years, again, just more of that personal spiritual study and work to remember who I am and who we all are, which is love.
Mm. Well, thank you. And again, congratulations on your book.
Thank you.
Thanks, Barbara. So the next question was, so what do you say to people who tell you it's time to move on when you never really do? Grief changes, but it's always there someplace.
Well, it's not for us to judge what is a person's time frame for moving on. We can't really tell them that because we don't live in their shoes or in their body or in their emotions. You know, in my own sort of personal survey, there was a gal who said after 3 years she was ready to move on after her husband died. Someone else said it was, 5 years. Another one said her mother took 7 years before she made any changes after her father died. So there's no time frame, and there's no way to tell somebody, well, just get over it. Well, no, that the work, and it depends on how much work they're doing or how much they resist doing it too. But as I say, you have to dive into those emotions. You have to feel it. You have to really be in it, and that can be very difficult for some people to do that, and so they resist. And so how can they move on when they're stuck? Mm-hmm. So we just have to have compassion for them, knowing that they are where they are. And, there is no right way or wrong way to grieve. So there is no schedule, just like the grief train has no schedule. There's no schedule for grief in general. And there's no, you're supposed to follow this path of how many steps you're taking. No, you jump all over the place, from anger to grief to denial to you name it. And there's no way to define it. So compassion and allowing them to be where they are is really what we have to do.
Okay, were there any more questions? Let me check the chat box real quick.
Okay, I didn't see anything.
So, did you want to talk a little bit about the writing process? I know you talked about it took several years to get a publisher.
Well, yeah, everything is a process. I have to acknowledge my writing group. I took, as I said, classes at Book Passage with Leslie Keenan, and then joined a writing group, and we meet every Friday, and that's been going on for over 7 years. So at this point, when I started reading my blog posts, they were the ones I told them this morning it was their fault I wrote this book, because they kept saying, okay, now you have to turn it into a book. And so when you start, you write some, and for our group, we read and get feedback every week on what we've written, and we make commitments for what we're going to do. And then it's fine tuning it. You write it, you rewrite it, you rewrite it. And then there's the whole process of all that you have to prepare for getting a publisher. You have to write your synopsis. You have to do research on books that are like your books and why they're not like your book. And there's a lot of process. And without the guidance from Leslie and my group, I would not have been able to do all of that. So that's why it's not like, my husband died 10 years ago and boom, I have a book. 10 years later, here we are. And it's a surprise to me because I didn't start out writing a book. I just started writing for my own process. So I think the most important thing for people to remember is don't figure out what you're writing for other than for yourself, because there's no way to know how it's going to unfold. And the only other thing I say is that, one little bit at a time again and again, allow something to be produced that if you thought about it would be overwhelming. And so you just do a little bit at a time, and then you see and are guided to what is next to unfold. Basically, I forget that quote, but you take one step and the universe conspires with you to move forward. So you have a clarity of intention of just doing what it is you're doing in this moment, and the rest will take care of itself. So if there aren't any questions, I'd love to close with a very last little short reading from my book. Mm-hmm. Okay, and this is the last chapter. It says the grief train, and it's talking about bereavement. And bereavement is a time of mourning. It's another word for mourning. There's no rushing it. It takes years, really. It has its own schedule. The grief train doesn't have a schedule. It can show up anytime and surprise us. That wave of grief for what requires us to feel our feelings when it arrives at our station. We are mourning for being deprived of our loved one, being robbed of that person in our life. They are taken away and we don't see them again. They aren't available to talk to spend time with anymore. That's the hard part, the hurt part, and it takes time to heal, or at least to feel less tender about the loss. It's not something that can be analyzed or thought through. It touches our heart, our emotion. Emotion is energy in motion, like waves in the ocean. We can't control the waves, and we can't control the waves of emotion. Bereavement is a station I can be residing in and not even notice I am still there after so long. And surprise, the grief train will stop at my station. I believe the work is to be willing to greet that train, to honor and acknowledge it, and to sit with it when it arrives. So in closing, I just want to acknowledge each and every one of you that has joined us today, and that each of you contributes in your world in a very special way. And this is a reminder in this trying times that we're in, that we all we have is today. So we never know when that train will show up. So take the opportunity to appreciate each other, to be with each other, and to be present. Each person in our lives is a gift. That's why they call it the present. So I thank you for joining me today. And if you know someone that would benefit from my book, please order it from Book Passage or from bookshop.com. That they provide benefits for independent bookstores or Amazon. And a special thanks to Franklin and the Larkspur Library for creating this talk. I so appreciate it. Thank you so much.
No, thank you for sharing. I mean, I know it's a very personal story, but like I said, it's a little book, but it's a great book. Everybody should get it. Get it from Book Passage if you can. It helps support our local stores. But again, thank you for spending the afternoon with us, Marinda. And again, I know this is a very personal story for you, but thank you for sharing your journey with us and your wisdom. And I still need to process too, because I'm one of those who's been in denial about losing someone. But this is a good way to do it, and I still love the idea of the altars. That is a great suggestion. And I want to thank everybody for joining us today. And thank you, Marinda. Thank you, and you guys all have a great afternoon. So. I'll see you next time. So.